Have you ever stopped in the middle of a completely ordinary day, looked at your life, and wondered where you actually went? Not in a physical sense, but in that quiet, aching space inside your chest. You look at your routine, the people around you, the decisions you make every single morning, and a heavy realization slowly settles in. You don't really know the person living your life anymore. We often imagine that losing ourselves is a sudden, cataclysmic event. We think it requires a massive heartbreak, a devastating betrayal, or a sudden loss that shatters our world into pieces overnight. But more often than not, losing yourself is a remarkably quiet, almost imperceptible process. It doesn't happen with a roar. It happens in a series of tiny, forgotten whispers. It happens in the slow, daily accumulation of small decisions where you consciously chose to step away from your own truth just to keep things smooth, safe, and manageable. Think back to those early moments, the ones that felt so small at the time that you didn't even register their significance. It started the first time you felt a sharp, clear boundary rising within you, but instead of speaking it out loud, you swallowed your words to avoid making someone else uncomfortable. It happened when you felt an overwhelming sense of sadness, exhaustion, or frustration. But when someone asked how you were doing, you automatically forced a soft smile and said, "I'm totally fine." In that exact moment, a small part of you learned a painful lesson. Your actual experience was too inconvenient, too heavy, or too risky to share. So you began to edit yourself. You started editing your tone before you spoke, softening your opinions so you wouldn't stand out, and dampening your enthusiasm so no one would think you were too much. You paid close attention to what the people around you needed, what they expected, and what made them comfortable. And you slowly reshaped your personality to fit into those molds. You learned to ignore the subtle physical signals your body was sending you. The tight knot in your stomach when a boundary was crossed. The heavy exhaustion in your shoulders after taking on someone else's burden. The quiet lump in your throat when your true feelings were left unsaid. You told yourself that you were just being mature, flexible, or kind. You told yourself that keeping the peace was worth the small discomfort of staying quiet. But keeping the peace on the outside cost you your peace on the inside. Every single time you chose someone else's comfort over your own emotional reality, you took a tiny step away from your core. You abandoned yourself in small, daily increments until the distance between who you actually are and the mask you wear every day became a vast, terrifying ocean. You became an expert at anticipating everyone else's needs while completely forgetting your own. You learned how to read a room in seconds, picking up on the slightest shift in someone's mood and immediately adjusting yourself to fix it, calm it down, or take responsibility for it. But when was the last time you checked in on your own climate? When was the last time you asked yourself what you needed, without immediately filtering it through the lens of whether or not it was convenient for anyone else? The hardest part about this quiet self-abandonment is that the world often rewards you for it. People love the version of you that never says no, the version that never demands attention, the version that carries heavy loads without ever complaining. You get praised for being resilient, for being easygoing, for being the reliable rock that everyone else can lean on. But no one sees the immense pressure building beneath that calm exterior. No one sees how terrifying it is to realize that the life you built is supported by a foundation of your own silence. Eventually, the weight of that silence becomes too heavy to ignore. You reach a point where the mask no longer fits quite right, but dropping it feels completely terrifying because you aren't sure what or who is left underneath it. You look in the mirror, looking past the surface, and meet the eyes of a stranger who has been waiting patiently for you to notice them again. If you are reading this, if you are sitting in that quiet space of recognition right now, please know that you are not broken. You did not abandon yourself out of weakness. You did it out of survival. You did it because, at some point, hiding who you truly were felt like the only way to stay safe, loved, or accepted. But you do not have to keep hiding anymore. The journey back to your authentic self does not require a dramatic, overnight transformation. It simply begins with the courage to acknowledge that you walked away, and the gentle decision to turn around and take one step back toward yourself. If you are ready to stop abandoning your own truth and begin the quiet journey back to who you genuinely are, take a slow, deep breath and leave a comment right now saying, "I am ready to return to myself." Let that be your quiet, unwavering promise as we begin this path together. When we hear the word trauma, our minds almost instantly picture monumental, life-altering catastrophes. We think of dramatic events that leave unmistakable scars, the kinds of moments that split a life cleanly into a clear before and an after. Because of this, so many of us spend years walking around carrying deep, aching wounds while quietly telling ourselves, "Nothing that bad ever happened to me. I don't have the right to feel this broken." We minimize our own pain, feeling guilty for our struggles because our lives might look completely peaceful on the outside. But at its absolute root, trauma is not just about the event that happened to you on the outside. Trauma is what happened inside you as a direct result of that event. It is the invisible impact, the quiet rupture, and the sudden loss of safety that stays behind long after the moment itself has passed. It is what happens to your inner world when an experience is simply too heavy, too sudden, or too overwhelming for your emotional capacity to digest in that moment. Trauma is the exact moment you adapted to an environment by shutting down a core part of your true essence just to survive it. Think back to those subtle, forgotten moments of your past that you rarely talk about. Think about a time when you were young or vulnerable, and you brought something deeply genuine to the surface. Maybe you shared a quiet piece of writing, expressed a moment of pure, uninhibited excitement, or let out a profound, aching sorrow. And instead of being met with warmth, safety, or open arms, that vulnerability was met with cold dismissal, harsh criticism, or complete, deafening indifference. In that exact, fleeting second, something crucial shifted inside you. Your nervous system, built to protect you at all costs, recorded a profound and terrifying lesson. Being authentic is dangerous. Showing your true self leads to rejection, abandonment, or pain. And so, to survive that ache and protect your heart from ever feeling that helpless again, you made an unconscious agreement. You buried that part of yourself deep beneath the surface. You locked away your spontaneous joy, your sensitive feelings, or your honest voice, placing a heavy stone over the door. Trauma, in its simplest and most heartbreaking form, is the disconnect from your true nature that occurred the moment you decided it was safer to be accepted than to be real. It is the chronic belief that you cannot afford to drop your guard, even among those who love you. It is the way your body instantly tightens when someone asks for your opinion, making you hesitate and second-guess your answer until it sounds safe enough. It is the lingering feeling that you are constantly walking on fragile glass, carefully measuring your steps, your voice, and your presence so that you don't disturb the peace around you. When you live with this buried pain, life stops being an open experience of living and becomes a constant, exhausting strategy of self-defense. You aren't experiencing the present moment for what it is. You are constantly reading the subtle cues of your surroundings, searching for the hidden signs that you might be rejected, judged, or hurt again. You carry an underlying sense of vigilance, a quiet expectation that the other shoe is always about to drop. Understanding trauma in this gentle, emotional way changes everything. It means you can stop measuring your pain against anyone else's story. You don't need to justify your wounds to earn the right to heal them. If a moment in your life forced you to disconnect from who you were, if it taught you to shrink, to hide, or to doubt your basic right to exist as you are, then that moment left a mark worth tending to. You don't need to fix a broken spirit. You simply need to recognize the ways you learned to protect yourself and gently begin creating a safe space where those buried parts of you can finally come back out into the light. To survive in a world that felt unpredictable, unsafe, or conditional, you did what any human being would do. You adapted. You learned early on that being completely honest about your feelings, your needs, or your limits came with a cost you couldn't afford to pay. So, you created a version of yourself specifically designed for safety. You built a carefully constructed persona, a protective shell built out of the exact traits that kept the peace around you. You became the reliable one who never breaks down, the person everyone turns to because you somehow always have it together. Or perhaps you became the constant caretaker, anticipating everyone else's sadness or anger before they even felt it, holding their emotional world together while your own fell apart in silence. You became the overachiever, believing that if you were just successful enough, quiet enough, or helpful enough, you would finally earn a permanent sense of safety and belonging. You became the person who always agrees, who smiles when hurt, and who says, "It's fine," when every part of your soul is crying out that it isn't. Consider the immense daily energy it takes to maintain this adaptive self. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly edit your words in your head before they ever leave your mouth, carefully filtering every sentence to make sure it won't offend, upset, or disappoint anyone. Think about those long, quiet nights where you lay awake, replaying standard daily conversations over and over, agonizing over a minor detail, wondering if you came across wrong or if someone is secretly upset with you. Think about the overwhelming knot that forms in your stomach whenever you need to say a simple no to someone, as if standing up for your time is a betrayal. Carl Jung once noted, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." We spend so much of our limited lifetime trying to be who we think others need us to be that we completely lose touch with what we actually want, feel, or need. When you spend decades wearing a mask to stay safe, the line between who you are and who you pretend to be begins to blur. You forget what true rest feels like, because even your downtime is filled with the quiet guilt that you should be doing more for someone else. You forget your own preferences, your own voice, and your own limits, because your whole life has been spent managing the emotional environment around you. The tragedy of the adaptive self is that it works so well on the outside. People admire your patience, your constant availability, and your calm demeanor. But inside, that mask feels like a suit of armor that has become far too heavy to carry. It protects you from being hurt, but it also isolates you from being truly seen, deeply known, or authentically loved. You realize that people love the version of you that serves them, but you remain terrified that if you ever dropped the act, if you showed up tired, messy, angry, or broken, they would leave. Holding up that version of yourself takes every drop of your emotional energy. It leaves you feeling hollowed out, carrying an invisible weight that grows heavier with every suppressed emotion and unstated boundary. But this protective mask was never meant to be your permanent home. It was just a shelter you built during a storm. The storm has passed, and you no longer have to carry the heavy weight of being everything to everyone else while remaining nothing to yourself. Living in a constant state of self-abandonment leaves a quiet, heavy footprint on every single area of your daily life. When you spend years betraying your own needs to preserve the comfort of others, the consequences don't always show up as a dramatic crisis. Most of the time, they show up in the subtle, agonizing ways you navigate your ordinary, everyday existence, ways that leave you feeling deeply exhausted, disconnected, and endlessly running on empty. You might find yourself sitting at your desk, staring at a blank screen or a simple project, completely paralyzed by indecision. It isn't because you lack talent, intelligence, or capability. It is because you have suppressed your internal compass for so long that you no longer trust your own judgment. Every small decision feels fraught with tension because your mind immediately filters every option through a single, exhausting question. Which choice will keep everyone else happy and prevent me from being criticized? When you cannot trust your own feelings, even choosing what to eat, what to wear, or how to spend a free hour becomes an overwhelming mental burden. Or perhaps you experience it in those quiet moments when the noise of the day finally fades away. You sit alone in a quiet room, and instead of feeling a sense of peaceful rest, a sudden, heavy wave of hollow anxiety settles into your chest. It seems to come out of nowhere, especially on days when everything on the surface appeared to go completely fine. But that anxiety isn't random. It is the quiet, accumulated grief of your true self, calling out from beneath the surface after being ignored all day long. It is the physical toll of holding your breath, softening your boundaries, and swallowing your truth just to get through the routine hours without causing a ripple. Self-abandonment also robs you of the simple, unearned joys of being alive. You might hesitate to pick up a creative hobby you used to love, writing a few quiet pages, sketching in a notebook, or learning an instrument, talking yourself out of it before you even begin. You tell yourself that it isn't productive enough, that you don't have time, or that you aren't good enough at it to justify the effort. But the real reason you pull back is because your protective patterns have convinced you that doing something purely for your own joy, without offering value or service to anyone else, is somehow selfish. This constant self-editing drains your spirit in ways that sleep simply cannot fix. You go to bed tired, and you wake up feeling just as heavy, carrying a quiet exhaustion that lives deep within your bones. You might look around at a life that appears stable and complete on the outside, yet feel like a distant ghost floating through your own story. You watch others move through the world with ease, expressing their opinions, stating their needs, and claiming their space, while you remain trapped in the shadow of your own caution. It is so vital to understand that this fatigue is not laziness, weakness, or a lack of personal discipline. It is the natural, inevitable result of living out of alignment with who you genuinely are, carrying the weight of who you think you need to be, while suppressing the truth of who you actually are, requires an astronomical amount of energy. Every time you say yes when your heart is crying out no. Every time you minimize your own hurt to make someone else feel comfortable. And every time you put your legitimate needs at the very bottom of the priority list, you pay a hidden cost. You sacrifice a small piece of your vitality, leaving you feeling increasingly distant from the warmth, peace, and wholeness that were always meant to be your birthright. Before you can begin to rebuild your life and step back into your truth, you have to look at the ways you survived with deep, gentle compassion rather than frustration. It is so easy to fall into the trap of judging yourself for the habits you carry today. You might feel angry at yourself for staying quiet when you wanted to speak, annoyed by your constant need for approval, or exhausted by the way you instantly retreat the moment a relationship feels too intense or vulnerable. You look at these patterns and label them as flaws, believing they are broken pieces of your character that need to be aggressively fixed or eliminated. But if you pause and look closer at those very same patterns, you will see something heartbreakingly beautiful. Every single one of them was born out of a profound instinct to protect your heart. The chronic people-pleasing, the endless hesitation before taking a single step forward, the urge to apologize for simply having a feeling, and the instinct to pull away before anyone can get close enough to hurt you. None of these came from weakness. They were once brilliant, necessary solutions to deeply difficult situations. They were the clever, intuitive ways your younger self managed to navigate an environment where your emotional safety was fragile, uncertain, or conditional. When you were younger, you did not have the power, the words, or the independence to change your surroundings. You could not simply walk away from coldness, rejection, or emotional overwhelm. The only tool you had was adaptation. Your nervous system took note of every single moment you felt unsafe, embarrassed, or abandoned, and it quietly built a system of defense mechanisms to ensure you would never have to feel that precise pain again. If staying quiet kept you from being yelled at, quietness became your shield. If anticipating someone else's mood kept the peace, hypervigilance became your radar. If hiding your true desires meant you would never be disappointed by dismissal, holding back became your sanctuary. When you finally realize that your struggle is not a sign of personal failure, but a testament to how hard you fought to keep yourself safe, everything changes. You stop fighting against yourself. You realize you don't need to wage a war against your own mind or fix a broken version of who you are. You simply need to meet those old protective layers with immense gratitude. You can look at the anxious thoughts, the hesitation, and the quiet fear, and acknowledge that they were just trying to hold you together when you felt entirely unsupported. Healing begins in the exact moment you transition from self-criticism to self-understanding. It happens when you can look at your protective instincts, wrap them in understanding, and gently let them know that the original emergency is over. You can acknowledge that while those habits protected your younger self in the past, you are no longer that helpless. You are older now. You have options, agency, and the capacity to handle life's uncertainties. You can thank those old defense mechanisms for their years of faithful service and quietly inform them that you are ready to take the reins and hold your own space now. Becoming yourself again is not a sudden, dramatic awakening where everything instantly falls into place. It is a slow, quiet, and deliberate journey back to the internal signals you spent years learning to ignore. When you have lived for so long on high alert, constantly adjusting to the emotional climate of the world around you, turning your attention back inward can initially feel foreign, uncomfortable, and even a little frightening. You might sit with yourself and feel nothing but a quiet, confusing stillness, unsure of what your true voice even sounds like anymore. That is entirely natural. You are rebuilding a relationship with a part of yourself that has been waiting patiently in the shadows for a very long time. This path back to your internal compass does not require grand gestures or drastic transformations. It begins in the smallest, most ordinary moments of your standard daily routine. It is deciding to pause for just 2 quiet minutes when a sudden wave of overwhelm washes over you, choosing to sit in silence with your breath instead of immediately seeking out a distraction to numb the discomfort. It is paying attention to the subtle, physical truths your body has been trying to tell you for years. It is noticing the sharp, subtle tension that tightens in your shoulders during a meeting or social gathering, or the heavy weight that settles in your stomach when an obligation feels wrong. Instead of pushing through that discomfort like you used to, returning to your compass means honoring that signal. It means taking a slow breath and recognizing that your body is simply trying to tell you that a boundary has been crossed or a limit has been reached. Carl Jung observed, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." For so long, you looked outside for the answers. You looked to the expectations of others to tell you if you were good enough, safe enough, or worthy enough. You measured your value by how useful you were to those around you. But looking inside requires you to gently shift your focus. It means asking yourself simple, compassionate questions throughout the day. How do I actually feel right now? What do I need in this exact moment? What is my body trying to tell me? At first, you might not hear a clear answer, and that is okay. Tuning inward isn't about finding immediate, perfect clarity. It is simply about demonstrating to yourself that you are finally willing to listen. Every single time you pause to check in with your heart, even if all you find is a quiet whisper or a sense of exhaustion, you are laying a single brick in a new foundation of self-trust. You are proving to that buried part of yourself that you will no longer abandon your own emotional reality just to keep things easy for everyone else. This path requires immense patience with yourself. There will be days when you feel completely connected to your truth, and days when you slip back into old habits of looking outside yourself for validation. But every time you notice that you have drifted, and you gently bring your attention back to your own heart without judgment, you are coming home. You are slowly learning that your internal compass was never lost. It was simply waiting for you to slow down, listen close, and trust where it has been trying to guide you all along. As you begin to listen to your inner compass again, you will eventually stumble upon the quiet ruins of the things you abandoned along the way. Think back to the person you were before the world told you who you had to be. Think about the pure, uncalculated joys, the creative impulses, and the simple passions you pushed aside because they didn't seem useful, productive, or acceptable to the people around you. Maybe you used to love writing long, reflective notes in a journal just for yourself, capturing thoughts that no one else would ever read. Maybe you used to sketch quiet patterns on a page, lose yourself in hours of peaceful reading without needing to achieve a goal, or spend afternoons listening to music that moved your soul. But as life got heavier and the pressure to adapt grew stronger, you quietly laid those things down. You told yourself you were too busy, that those quiet interests were silly or frivolous, or that you needed to focus on more important, practical things. In reality, you didn't drop those parts of yourself because you outgrew them. You dropped them because staying safe and meeting everyone else's expectations required all the energy you had. You traded your personal wonder for survival. Reclaiming the parts you left behind is not about becoming a master at a new skill or turning a passion into something you show off to the world. It is simply about inviting those quiet, forgotten joys back into your life, free from the crushing weight of perfection, judgment, or evaluation. It means permitting yourself to engage in an activity purely because it brings a gentle, warming sense of peace to your heart, not because it fulfills a duty, earns praise, or proves your worth to anyone else. Consider how healing it is to pick up a pen and write a few lines without caring if the grammar is right, or to sit with a creative idea simply because it makes your spirit feel light. Consider the relief of engaging in something where there is no right or wrong answer, no expectations to live up to, and no audience to please. When you allow yourself to do things simply for the quiet delight of doing them, you send a powerful message to your soul. Your joy matters. Your inner life has value, even when it serves no external purpose. Reclaiming yourself is like gathering up all the scattered pieces of who you are, the pieces you dropped at different stages of your life whenever you felt judged, unsafe, or misunderstood. You don't need to reclaim everything all at once. It starts with one small, gentle gesture of self-kindness. It is choosing to spend 20 quiet minutes doing something that nourishes your spirit, simply because you want to. As you pick up those forgotten pieces and integrate them back into your daily routine, you will feel a long-lost warmth returning to your life. You begin to realize that you are no longer just surviving day to day. You are slowly, lovingly piecing together the full, beautiful story of who you were always meant to be. You cannot truly reconnect with who you genuinely are if you leave every single door to your heart and life wide open for the world to walk through. For so long, you may have believed that being a good, loving person meant having no limits at all. You believed that love required complete self-sacrifice, that to be worthy of affection, respect, or safety, you had to be infinitely available, endlessly patient, and constantly willing to set your own needs aside to carry someone else's burden. But a life without limits is not a life of love. It is a life of slow, continuous self-erasure. Learning to set boundaries is not about building cold, bitter walls to keep the world out or to push people away. It is not an act of hostility, anger, or retaliation. At its deepest and most beautiful root, a boundary is simply a line of quiet clarity. It is the gentle definition of where you end and where another person begins. It is the sacred space where you preserve enough of your own energy, peace, and emotional presence so that you can actually exist as a whole human being, rather than a hollow vessel, constantly being drained by the demands of everything around you. Setting a boundary simply means looking at your life and saying, I care about you, but I also care about my own survival. I can offer you my support, but I cannot destroy my own peace to give you yours. Think about how terrifying it feels when you first try to speak a small boundary out loud. Consider the sudden, sharp wave of guilt that instantly rises up in your chest The moment you even think about saying no to a request that feels like too much. You might hesitate for hours, drafting an explanation in your mind, trying to come up with a reason that sounds valid enough, urgent enough, or dramatic enough to justify simply needing to protect your own rest. You feel like an imposter for having limits, as if taking care of your basic emotional capacity is somehow a betrayal of those you love. It is so essential to understand where that guilt comes from. That heavy, uncomfortable guilt is not proof that you are doing something wrong, selfish, or unkind. It is simply the old protective mechanism inside you, reacting to change. For years, your survival depended on keeping everyone around you comfortable, placated, and calm. Your nervous system learned to associate setting a boundary with immediate danger, with the threat of conflict, rejection, coldness, or abandonment. So when you finally stand up and state a simple limit, that old, protective voice panics, flooding your body with guilt to convince you to shrink back down into the safety of compliance. Recognizing this truth changes everything. You can feel the guilt rise up, acknowledge its presence with deep compassion, and still stand firm in what you need. You do not need to over-explain, apologize, or justify your right to rest, to hold your own space, or to protect your emotional energy. A simple, quiet answer is enough. Saying, "I don't have the capacity for this right now," or choosing to step away from a dynamic that leaves you feeling consistently diminished, is not a failure of love. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. When you practice setting gentle, firm boundaries, you will inevitably ruffle the feathers of those who grew accustomed to your lack of limits. People who profited from your self-abandonment may react with disappointment, anger, or confusion. They may try to make you feel guilty for no longer playing the role you used to play. But their reaction is not your responsibility to fix. Their discomfort is simply the natural adjustment that occurs when you stop allowing your peace to be negotiable. Every single time you honor a boundary, every time you choose to say no on the outside so that you can say a quiet, truthful yes to yourself on the inside, you perform a quiet act of healing. You show that buried, vulnerable part of your spirit that you are finally ready to protect it. You prove to yourself that your peace, your time, and your emotional reality matter just as much as anyone else's. And in that safe, protected space, your authentic self finally finds the freedom to breathe, to rest, and to grow. When you begin the delicate work of returning to yourself, it is easy to assume that progress will look like a smooth, steady climb upward. We want to believe that once we understand our old patterns, once we recognize how we abandoned ourselves, we will simply stop doing it. We hope that healing will be a clean, decisive moment where the old fears vanish forever, replaced by unbroken confidence, instant clarity, and effortless self-love. But the reality of healing is far softer, far messier, and infinitely more human than that. Rebuilding trust with yourself is not a linear, perfect line where every single day feels better than the one before. It is an intricate, non-linear process filled with quiet victories, sudden pauses, and unexpected steps backward. There will be days when you feel completely grounded in your truth, standing tall in your boundaries, and listening clearly to your inner compass. And then, without warning, a difficult moment will arise, and you will catch yourself slipping right back into an old, familiar survival pattern. You might catch yourself staying silent during a moment where you desperately wanted to speak up. You might catch yourself instantly agreeing to a request that leaves you feeling exhausted, simply to avoid a brief moment of tension. You might catch yourself seeking external approval for a choice you already knew was right for you, or feeling that old, familiar wave of panic the moment someone seems slightly distant or cold. In those exact moments, a harsh, critical voice inside your head will try to convince you that you have failed. It will tell you that you haven't made any real progress at all, that you are right back where you started, and that all your efforts to heal were useless. This is where the true heart of rebuilding trust resides. Rebuilding trust does not mean never making a mistake, never feeling afraid, or never falling back into an old defense mechanism. Rebuilding trust means changing the way you respond to yourself when those moments inevitably happen. If you spent a lifetime abandoning yourself, you cannot expect your heart to instantly believe that you are safe now. Your spirit has experienced years of being put second, of having its voice suppressed and its feelings pushed aside. Rebuilding that internal relationship is very much like trying to earn the trust of a stray, frightened animal that has been hurt many times before. If you scream at it the moment it flinches or retreats into the shadows, it will only run further away. But if you sit quietly, extend a soft, gentle hand, and offer infinite patience, it slowly learns that it no longer has to hide. When you notice that you have stepped back into an old pattern, resist the overwhelming urge to judge, criticize, or punish yourself. Instead, take a slow, deep breath and meet yourself with profound compassion. Look at that old reaction with soft, understanding eyes and whisper to yourself, "It makes complete sense why I reacted that way. That was how I protected myself for so long, and it's okay that it happened." Every single time you catch yourself slipping into an old habit and choose to meet yourself with understanding rather than self-condemnation, you rewire your entire relationship with your own heart. You demonstrate that your love for yourself is no longer conditional on your ability to perform perfectly. You prove that you are not going to turn your back on yourself the moment things get difficult or messy. Trust is built in the quiet, unglamorous moments of redirection. It is built every time you forgive yourself for losing your balance. It is built every time you pause in the middle of a bad day and choose to offer yourself comfort instead of criticism. You are proving, step by small step, that you are genuinely committed to staying by your own side through every part of this journey. The victories, the stumbles, and everything in between. You are learning that returning to yourself is not an event, but a continuous, loving practice of choosing to come back home to your own heart over and over again as you gradually strip away the heavy, suffocating layers of who you thought you had to be. A quiet, profound transformation begins to take root deep within your soul. It does not happen with grand fanfare or an explosive revelation that changes your world overnight. Instead, it arrives softly, like the first warm rays of sunlight breaking through a long, foggy morning. You begin to notice a subtle shift in the way you breathe, the way your feet touch the ground, and the way you carry yourself through the ordinary hours of your day. Stepping into your authentic life means finally coming home to the person you were always meant to be before the world taught you to hide, shrink, and apologize for your existence. You begin to experience a grounded, quiet confidence that no longer depends on the fleeting praise, approval, or validation of those around you. For so long, your sense of safety was tied to how well you managed the expectations of others, how useful you were to those in your life, or how perfectly you could perform a role. But as you reclaim your internal compass, the frantic noise of external opinions begins to fade into the background. You start making choices based on internal alignment rather than fear of rejection. You choose paths that bring peace to your spirit, even if they don't make sense to everyone watching from the outside. Think about how liberating it feels to sit in a room and simply be present, without feeling the exhausting urge to perform, fix, or smooth over every silent moment. Consider the profound relief of speaking your truth in a calm, steady voice, not to win an argument or prove your worth, but simply because your feelings deserve to be expressed. When you live authentically, you no longer waste your vital energy pretending to be interested in things that leave you feeling hollow, or forcing yourself into relationships where you have to mute your true self just to belong. You discover that real belonging never requires self-erasure. The people who are truly meant to walk alongside you will love you for your honesty, your boundaries, your quiet joys, and your human vulnerabilities, not for the helpful mask you used to wear. This does not mean your life will suddenly become free of pain, uncertainty, or loss. Life will still bring its natural storms, difficult choices, and moments of grief. But the way you navigate those challenges changes entirely. You are no longer navigating the dark while abandoned by your own heart. When difficult seasons arrive, you no longer turn against yourself in judgment or panic. You stand beside yourself as a faithful, loving companion, trusting your ability to feel the full depth of your emotions and still remain whole. You realize that you are not starting over from scratch, picking up broken remnants of a shattered past. You are simply gathering up every lesson, every scar, every quiet tear, and every act of quiet survival, and weaving them into a life of genuine depth, warmth, and integrity. You have faced the hardest part of the journey, the terrifying realization that you had lost yourself, and the brave decision to turn around and walk back toward your own light. Take a slow, deep breath and let it settle into your chest. Feel the solid ground beneath you and acknowledge the immense courage it took to reach this moment. You no longer have to carry the heavy armor of who you used to be to stay safe. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to live a life that feels good on the inside, not just one that looks good on the outside. Trust the timing of your journey. Honor the wisdom of your heart. And remember that every small choice to choose yourself is bringing you back home to true, unbroken wholeness. You are finally here. You are finally real. And you are finally living your life as your true self. As we reach the quiet close of our journey together, take a moment to drop your shoulders, unclench your jaw, and let out a long, deep breath. You have traveled through the hidden roots of self-abandonment, faced the heavy weight of the protective masks you carried for so long, and explored the gentle, brave steps it takes to rebuild trust with your own heart. Healing is not about becoming someone completely new. It is about the quiet, sacred act of unlearning, stripping away every expectation, every fear, and every silent compromise that convinced you to hide your true nature. The path back to yourself is rarely smooth, and it is never a straight line. As you step forward from this quiet moment and carry these realizations back into your daily life, take one final step to anchor this promise to your spirit. Leave a comment below right now with your personal commitment. Writing, "I am worthy of my own love and belonging." Let your words serve as an indelible marker of the day you chose to stop hiding and finally came home to yourself.